Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going to break down a topic that's pretty much a rite of passage for any orthopedic trainee out there, the mid-shaft humerus fracture. Let's dive right in, Viva style.
Okay, so right off the bat, we're looking at a classic humeral shaft fracture. Now, you might hear that they only make up about, say, 3 to 5% of all fractures, but don't let that number fool you. They present a huge clinical challenge. The big question is always, when do you brace it, and when do you book them for the OR?
All right, to really get a handle on this, we've got to be systematic. So, here's our game plan. We'll start with the anatomy and forces, get the lingo down with classification, then jump into the conservative versus surgical paths. And finally, we'll wrap up with the big risks and what you really need to remember. First up, the foundation. We've got to understand the forces at play here. See, the humerus isn't just a bone floating in space. It's surrounded by some seriously powerful muscles. And when that bone breaks, those muscles create this incredible and pretty predictable tug-of-war on the broken pieces. So what does this muscular tug-of-war actually look like? Well, you've got the pectoralis major pulling the top fragment in towards the chest. Then the deltoid yanks it up and out. And to top it all off, the triceps and biceps are basically trying to shorten the whole arm. It's a real mess. And here's the absolute key takeaway from all that. Where the bone breaks completely changes how it's going to look on an X-ray. A fracture above that pec major insertion, it's going to look totally different from one below it. And you have to understand this because it tells you exactly how you need to pull on it to get it back in place.
Okay, now that we've got the forces down, let's talk about the language. I mean, how do we classify these things? To make sure we're all speaking the same language, surgeons have come up with some standardized systems.
The big one you'll see everywhere is the AO/OTA classification. It's actually pretty straightforward. It just sorts the fractures by how complicated they are. You've got your type A, which is a simple, clean break, all the way up to a type C, where the bone is, well, it's in a bunch of pieces. All right, pay attention here, because this one is super high yield for any exam you'll ever take, the Holstein-Lewis fracture. Now, this isn't just some random break in the lower third of the arm. It's the spiral pattern of the break that makes it so infamous, because it puts a really important structure in danger. And this is exactly why it's so critical. You see that spiral? The radial nerve literally wraps around the humerus in what's called the spiral groove. And with this specific fracture pattern, the nerve can get trapped or even cut by the sharp bone ends. We're talking up to 22% of the time. That is not a small number. So, with all these complexities and talk of trapped nerves, you're probably thinking, okay, these all go to surgery, right? But here's the twist. The vast majority, and I mean some studies say over 90%, are actually treated without an operation.
So how do we do that? The gold standard is something called a functional brace, or a Sarmento brace. It's a brilliant piece of kit. It basically works by using your own muscles and soft tissues to squeeze the fracture fragments together, kind of like a hydraulic press. This keeps it stable, but still allows for this tiny bit of micromotion, and that's the secret sauce that tells the bone, hey, it's time to heal.
Okay, so if we're not making it perfect, how much imperfection is okay? You'd be surprised. The shoulder is incredibly forgiving. As long as the fracture stays within these numbers, and yeah, these are some high-yield numbers you need to know. We can expect it to heal just fine. We're talking union rates well over 90%, with people getting back to doing what they love. But of course, it's not always that simple. What happens when you can't keep the fracture within those acceptable limits? Or what if there are other things going on? Well, that's our cue to start thinking about heading to the operating room. You can really break down the reasons to operate into two main buckets. First, you have your absolute, no questions asked indications. Think an open fracture where the bone is sticking out, or a major blood vessel injury. Those are going to the OR, period. Then you have the relative bucket. In these cases, surgery isn't a must-do, but it might just give the patient a better, or maybe just a faster result. So, let's say we've decided to operate. Now what? Well, our two main tools in the toolbox are either plating it, that's the ORIF, or putting a rod down the middle, which we call an intramedullary nail or IMN. And listen, this isn't a coin flip. Each one has a totally different set of pros and cons that you've got to carefully consider for every single patient. Now, plating, that's kind of the gold standard if you want a perfect anatomic reduction. You open things up, you see the fracture, and you can piece it together like a jigsaw puzzle. But what's the catch? Well, it's a bigger operation, a bigger incision. And guess what's hanging out right where you're working? The radial nerve.
So yeah, the risk of injuring it goes up.
Nailing, on the other hand, is a whole different ballgame. It's much less invasive. You make a small incision, usually up by the shoulder, and you slide this rod right down the middle of the bone. That means less disruption, lower risk of infection. Sounds great, right? Well, the big trade-off is the shoulder. Sticking that nail in can really irritate the rotator cuff and lead to long-term shoulder pain.
Okay, so we've talked about bracing, plating, and nailing. But no matter which path you go down, there's one big, scary complication that should always be at the front of your mind.
12.3%. Let that sink in. That's how often we see a radial nerve palsy with these fractures. Clinically, this shows up as the classic wrist drop. The patient just can't lift their wrist or straighten their fingers. It's a really concerning thing to see.
But, and this is a huge but, here's the good news. The vast majority of these nerve injuries are just neuropraxias. Think of it like a badly bruised nerve, not a cut one. And what do bruises do? They get better. So most of the time, all you have to do is wait and the function will come back on its own.
Now what about those fractures that just seem to be taking their sweet time to heal? We're not just sitting around crossing our fingers. We can actually use tools like the Rush U Score. Around 6 weeks, we look at the x-ray, see how much healing bone or callus has formed, and score it. This gives us a pretty good idea of whether this thing is going to heal on its own or if we're heading towards a non-union and need to step in.
So, let's bring it all home. What are the key takeaways? Number 1, functional bracing is your go-to. It's the default for a reason. Number 2, surgery is for very specific situations, not for everyone. 3, that radial nerve palsy, it's common, it's scary, but it almost always gets better by itself. And finally, and I can't stress this enough, you have to document your neurovascular exam before you do anything and after you do anything, every single time.
And that really leaves us with a fascinating question to chew on. On one hand, you have bracing. It works incredibly well, but it's slow. On the other, you have surgery. It's faster, but it comes with bigger risks. In today's world where everyone wants to get back to their life like yesterday, how do you think that's going to change things? Will we see the pendulum swing more and more towards surgery? It's definitely something to think about.